All right, welcome to this historical explainer where we're going to dive right into this ancient, incredibly dramatic clash between the world's very first centralized dictator and the ultimate divine power. We're looking at a story where absolute, unchecked human arrogance meets a terrifyingly simple humbling. So let's start with a really crucial question. When the earth was wiped clean by the Great Flood, who was the first person to plunge humanity right back into submission? You know, people were scattered, they were traumatized by the destruction, and desperately looking for protection. But instead of a protector, well, they got Nimrod. He was the great-grandson of Noah, and he would go on to build an empire of absolute tyranny. Section 1, Rise of the First Dictator. From post-flood survivor to tyrant. What's fascinating here is how Nimrod brilliantly, yet completely ruthlessly, built the world's first centralized dictatorship. And he didn't just do it with swords. He used a calculated food monopoly. Basically, he gathered up all the grain from the farmers and herdsmen and locked it in these massive rail silos. He created this system where, if you were hungry, you had to come directly to the king. He essentially forced people to trade their basic sustenance for their total freedom. And just like that, he laid down the very first foundations of human slavery and absolute centralized control across 4 massive cities in Mesopotamia. And as you might guess, becoming intoxicated by that much complete control over a massive population kind of broke his reality. Nimrod's arrogance exploded into the ultimate blasphemy. He went completely beyond just being a king and actually claimed godhood himself. He built these massive palaces, forced his subjects to literally chant his name, and truly believed that because he controlled the food supply and the armies, well, he was the master of life and death. Section 2, the Tower of Babel. Challenging the heavens. Because honestly, dominating the earth just wasn't enough for him anymore. You have to remember, Nimrod lived in this state of constant paranoia of another divine flood, exactly like the one his great-grandfather Noah survived. So to counter this, he bypassed normal stone and mud. Instead, he ordered the creation of fire-baked bricks, making them way harder than stone. And he had them bound together using bitumen, which is a black waterproof tar. This wasn't just a building, guys. It was an engineering marvel that was explicitly designed to withstand and frankly mock God's judgment. 2,300 meters. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Historical records and scholars suggest this structure, the legendary Tower of Babel, reached that astonishing height into the sky. It towered so high that clouds literally wrapped around its middle, and people actually claimed you could see the tides of the ocean from its peak. Nimrod's ego was literally manifesting in ancient architecture. But this architectural feat quickly shifted into sheer madness. Once the tower was completed, Nimrod climbed all the way to the top, stared down the sky, and shot an arrow directly into the clouds. And the source records state that the arrow actually returned to Earth covered in blood. Nimrod paraded this thing around, successfully tricking his terrified subjects into believing he had physically wounded the creator of the heavens. From that point on, idolatry and absolute submission became mandatory. Section 3, a prophetic birth. The star that terrified a king. Because just when his control seemed completely absolute, we hit a massive turning point. A terrifying prophetic dream of a blinding star completely shook the foundation of his dark empire. His top astrologers interpreted this to mean a boy would be born that very year who would destroy his kingdom and completely shatter his claim to godhood. So what does he do? Nimrod immediately launches a tyrannical slaughter of male infants. It's this grim foreshadowing of what a future pharaoh would do. And yet, through divine protection, a single mother managed to hide her newborn safely away in a dark, remote cave. And that child? That was the infant prophet Ibrahim. The extreme contrast here is just wild. On one side, you have Nimrod's empire, massive armies, absolute surveillance, endless wealth, and literally the tallest tower in human history. And on the flip side, you have the divine plan, a helpless infant growing up in total isolation. The world's most powerful military machine was utterly powerless against a single boy who was just growing up in the shadows, looking up at the stars, the moon, and the sun, and quietly discovering the true unseen creator. Section 4, the Great Debate. Illusion of power versus true authority. Years later, that boy in the cave became a man. What follows is an absolute intellectual knockout. Right in the middle of the royal court of Babylon, the fearless young Ibrahim confronts Nimrod. And the Tyrant tries to prove he controls life and death by doing this cheap parlor trick. He simply executes one prisoner and pardons another, but Ibrahim just completely bypasses it with a cosmic challenge. He says, "My lord brings the sun from the east, so you bring it from the west." And the result of that challenge? Absolute pin-drop silence. The dictator was utterly speechless. Stripped of his grand illusions right in front of his most elite warriors and ministers, Nimrod was completely paralyzed by simple logic. He had absolutely no answer. And in that moment, his fragile ego instantly snapped. Section 5. The Ultimate Inferno. A test of faith and physics. Unable to win with his intellect, the completely humiliated tyrant resorted to brute force. To really grasp the sheer terror of this execution, you have to look at the numbers. Modern science estimates that the massive fire Nimrod ordered, which was fueled for months by an entire civilization where people literally volunteered to gather wood just to appease the king, would burn at well over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The source text actually notes the heat was so intense that it was vaporizing birds mid-flight. I mean, no one could even get close to the thing. Because the heat was so immense, they actually had to build a massive catapult just to throw Ibrahim into the flames from a distance. And as he was launched through the air into this roaring inferno, he didn't scream, he didn't beg for his life. He just uttered these chillingly calm words of absolute faith. "Allah is enough for me, and He is the best disposer of affairs." And right here is where we see the central theme of our entire story. The physical laws of nature aren't entirely subservient to their creator. The physics of fire, which is obviously designed to burn and destroy flesh, were instantly suspended. The flames literally turned cool and peaceful, blooming into a garden around Ibrahim. So while Nimrod watched in absolute horror from his high tower, Ibrahim just sat safely amidst the glowing coals. His chains had burned away, sure, but his body was completely untouched. Section 6. The Final Showdown. War declared on heaven. You'd think witnessing a blatant miracle like that would humble a person, right? But no, it drove the dictator into sheer lunacy. The madness just kept building to this incredible conclusion. Nimrod actually marched a 100,000-man army out to the open plains to physically fight God. But God didn't send angels, He didn't send thunder or earthquakes. Instead, the sky turned pitch black, not with storm clouds, but with a massive swarm of mosquitoes. The absolute weakest creatures on Earth descended, and they devoured that invincible army down to the bone in minutes. Out of all that terrifying military might, only the king escaped. He fled back to his fortress, but he was relentlessly pursued by a single lame mosquito with a broken wing. And here is the kicker. That single broken-winged mosquito crawled right up Nimrod's nose and settled deep into his brain membrane. For exactly 400 years, that tiny insect caused him agonizing, maddening torment. It was an exact, beautifully poetic mirror to the 400 years he had spent ruling with arrogance and demanding that people worship him. The aftermath of all this was spectacularly humiliating. The pain in his head was so severe that the only way Nimrod could get any relief at all was by actually begging his servants to smash his head with their shoes and heavy mallets. The man who once demanded worship ended up dying when a servant struck him a bit too hard with a mallet, splitting his skull. Following this, the great city of Babylon was scattered, and their unified language was scrambled into confusion, so they couldn't even understand each other anymore. And, remarkably, the source notes that history actually repeated itself centuries later when the Roman Emperor Titus faced a strikingly similar, agonizing fate via a mosquito after he desecrated Jerusalem. So as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look around at our modern world. We might not be building literal brick towers to shoot arrows at the sky anymore, but are our modern towers of technology, our total obsession with science over morality, and our endless accumulation of wealth, are these just new versions of the Tower of Babel? Are we placing the exact same blind faith in our own creations today that Nimrod did in his? It really leaves us with this final profound thought to carry with us today. No matter how high human arrogance reaches, no matter how much wealth or military might a tyrant hoards, ultimate power never actually belongs to them. Because for every Nimrod who truly believes they are untouchable, well, one mosquito is enough. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking knowledge, and I'll catch you next time.